Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Tongue Eater, chapters 31 through 35, Brightest Night, Tourists in Hebrest, The Shore of the Sea of Grass, Sailing the Green Depths, and Battle Aboard the Ship Chain. In these chapters, well, I still don't have my answer for why everybody's looking at our friends with this sort of sad pity. And I'm really starting to wonder what the hell, guys. I don't know what to think still. I'm paranoid and I'm like, should I be? Maybe I shouldn't be. But I feel like I should be. I don't know. I want to let go of this. But I'm fixated. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Dan for commissioning this episode. Dan is here in the chat. What's up, Dan? So these chapters are pretty wild. I really enjoy the touring of this like alien place. I keep forgetting that it's so different from the whole concept of visiting somewhere that you don't know the language is already very intimidating to a lot of us, other than, you know, those of you who are not ignorant Americans and you do know more than one language. I know a little Spanish, but I've really lost most of it in the past, like, decade. And the idea of being somewhere that's not only a completely different language, but also a completely different actual, like, world and system of magic, and everything about it is unfamiliar, is so overwhelming. And there are times when I read adventure stories that I realize, like, I would be the one holding up the whole show. You know, like, there's always, when you have like a group of friends in any fiction, there's often one, and in this, there really isn't, there's voices of reason among our friends, but it's not always the same person. It depends what the topic is that they're about to be adventurous about, who chimes in on it. So, you know, that's like kind of nice that that's not such a thing here. But the trope often is that within a group of, like, say 5 people, you've got one person who is the cautious one and always is like, well, you know, according to the rules, we really shouldn't do XYZ, or, well, have you really thought this through? Like, there are so many things that could go wrong. And that's just, I would be that person, and they're not fun in stories because you know that we're going to do the thing anyway. You know that the others are going to talk them into it or ignore them and just do it. But so, like, you just have to sort of sit through them whining until you get to the good shit. And I recognize that, but also I am such a, like, cautious type in certain ways. I'll throw caution to the winds in some ways, but I could never, you know, just, I don't know if it's simply because I live in a universe where just traveling to a different world isn't a thing people do. Maybe if there were something like Galvacrin's Guide to Worlds, if we had a thing like this and it felt a little bit more like people have done this before, it's unusual but not unheard of, maybe that would be reassuring. But overall, I think I would just be like, that seems like an awful lot of unknown variables, and I would rather not. So I appreciate when we've got this group who all, as much as they are cognizant of the risks they are taking, they are all throwing themselves into this in a way that I really admire and that is so much more fun to read about than the typical party of friends that has the one who hangs on so hard and kind of ruins the vibe for everybody. So, chapter 31, Brightest Night. They find an inn, and once again, we have a fucking innkeeper here who gives them a look. If Hugh didn't know better, he could have sworn the innkeeper gave them a sad look when he read the letter, and it almost seemed like the man wanted to reject their money entirely. Which, that's the part that gets me, is it's one thing to pity somebody. It's another thing to feel such a way that you almost want to reject their money. That's a different level. And the feel here is like, you guys are being set up, and it feels gross for me to take your money on top of whatever is happening here. And that's like the vibe I was also getting from the money changers. And I don't know what to think, because they don't get this sad look from everybody. They get different reactions from everybody. So it's not a consistent thing. And of course, that makes sense. Everybody's personalities aren't going to be the same. Everybody's reactions to things that are, you know, I would think objectively everybody be horrified by something, but I know realistically that's not true. But I am sort of fascinated by what this could say. And they bring up a couple times, like, I really wish we knew what the fuck this paper has on it, because it's inscrutable. Like, people are just behaving in a way that feels more confusing the more you hear about their reactions. So, Hugh was pretty sure, I love this, he felt less of his usual anxiety than normal. Hugh was pretty sure that his calm, relaxed state would be an anxious, terrible one for a normal person. Fucking same, bro. Like, and it's, you know, I was saying that there's no anxious person in the crew, and I stand by that. Like, Hugh is anxious, but it does not really hold him back. He is anxious, and it holds him back maybe in like a more personal way, but he doesn't usually hold the group back. He is somebody who will go along if everybody else seems like they're on board. He will keep his mouth shut and like do it anyway, which, you know, there's good and bad to that. And I love they order food and nobody knows what the food's going to be like. It arrives and it's just like, oh, all right. It seems like it's basically, I can't remember where it says, but something just like bread and meat. And that's like, you know, as simple as it's going to get. There's a description of the music and how different their instruments are, and that the way that the notes go is so unexpected. Like, just the whole accepted meter and tempo of music here is different, so it's really tough for him to get used to, which I really liked that description. Here it is. Dense loaves of bread, bowls of thick stew, and tankards of dark ale almost as thick as the stew. Sure, Hugh didn't recognize the meat or the vegetables in the stew, and the bread was made from some totally unknown grain, but it was still bread and stew. And honestly, once stuff's in a stew, how much do you recognize it anyway? It's fine. So they go to their rooms and they start training in their rooms with their affinities again, which once again, the fact that nobody is seeing them train, I think is a good thing. It mostly just consisted of trying to develop their new affinity senses while studying other topics. Every few minutes, one of them would gently toss a pebble, a chunk of bone, or a steel marble in the direction of one of the others not paying attention. None of them detected the flying objects. It would be at least a week or two, if not longer, before their new affinity senses would develop. Practicing like this would help speed the process along, though. And I found that sort of interesting, that there's just I would almost call this like passive learning, you know? And each of them has like affinities that they started off with that can in some ways help with detecting what's being thrown at them, but they have to avoid using that affinity for it. Otherwise, what's the point? They're not getting the practice they need. And in between pelting the others, Hugh was continuing his work on a syllabus for the other three, for teaching them his own affinities. He'd started developing it almost as soon as the four of them had dreamed up this plan, but there had been precious little time to work on it while preparing for their escape from Skyhold. And the fact that he's building a syllabus, like, I have no problem with it, but I just love it because it's so organized and so teacherly. It's just cute, you know? And he was considering dedicating most of his energy toward teaching the others to use their stellar affinity. And then he thinks Sabe would be difficult. He was still going to teach them a few crystal affinity tricks as well. If nothing else, he was pretty sure his crystal affinity sense was one of the most useful any of them had. He was going to largely ignore their planar affinity for now. And he realizes that Candoron had taught him her, like, the way she focused on the planar affinity. It's just this tiny aspect of it, growing extraplanar spaces. And it's something that takes so long to learn that for human beings, it's like not necessarily as good a payoff if you spend all your time doing this, because you kind of need to be someone who lives a really long time before you can actually master it. So he starts thinking about like figuring on teleportation, which I have always said, if I were going to be able to pick a superpower out of a hat. I did this game actually once at a party. We had to pick one major superpower and one really minor silly superpower that would be like, you know, it's useful but not something that you could fight with. And my major one was teleportation, and my minor one was my clothing will never get stained. That's like, it's such a minor thing, but can you imagine if you didn't have to worry about that? That's like a game changer. That's just a total, I would love that. But no, you're not going to fight with that. So yeah, he's thinking about teleportation. It is a really tricky thing that's super dangerous though. So Hugh didn't think Candoron's focus in extraplanar spaces was for him or his friends. And Dan is saying not stained, but can they smell? I guess they probably would, but that wouldn't bother me. Like, I don't stain via sweat or anything like that. Though, especially having big tits, every time I eat, if there is a single drip, it's all over me. Like, so if I had like a little scent of garlic from marinara sauce, but the stain wasn't visible, I would cope. That would be fine. That would be fine. Because I could still wash it normally anyway. I would still wash my clothes. But I just don't want to have to throw things away. Because I have to throw so much away, you guys. Some stains don't come out. And it just never really looks the same. And there's a sort of sloppiness to it. And I have had to get rid of so many things that I love because there's just a big old weird mustard stain somewhere that never came out. And he's like thinking about how fascinating it's going to be to learn to use all of their affinities together and overlap them with what they're already able to do. And he's realizing how complex this is, and it's growing his respect for different, you know, tutors and great powers, and for Alustin, which he is just really struggling with. Godric, by the way, has still not read his dad's letter here. I don't expect him to do this until like the end of the book, if I'm being honest. So we shall see. And when it comes to Miss T, me too, and with cooking, why don't I wear an apron? I own like 12 aprons. I wear them a lot. And it doesn't matter. The stains will like climb around the neckline of the apron. I swear to God. I love aprons, honestly. They're like kind of one of those little treats for me when I'm like shopping at a big box store or something and they have like seasonal aprons. I'm always like, ooh. And yet they don't cover enough. Like, if I'm going to, you know what I wish, you guys? I know I'm so sorry. Nobody cares about the stain thing, but I wish so much that wearing bibs as adults were like allowed. The only time that you are really allowed to wear a bib is if you go to like a rib place or a seafood place and you have like, crack your own lobster tails, things like that. They'll sometimes give you one of those big plastic bibs. And those are often mocked because they make you look like a child. Like, it's sort of considered low class, any place that has that sort of thing. And I couldn't give fewer fucks. Like, I wish I could just keep a really cute bib of some kind in my purse, go out to dinner, put it on, eat my food, take it off, and it would be, my savior to keep my outfit going for another couple months, hopefully. And if people had a problem with it, but you go and look for like adult bibs that are not meant for invalids above the age of 70, good luck. Miss T, will you please design stylish adult bibs? How about unspoiled swag? Oh my God. Oh, stylish adult bibs. I really have to think that over. What would that even look like? So anyway, I gotta, you guys, I gotta focus. So everybody is really focused on their training here. And we have a quote that's been underlined by 133 people, according to Kindle, from Sabe. She is quoting Lucan the Sour, a philosopher who is like Talia's favorite. And he's her favorite for reasons that it turns out have been kind of debunked. So he isn't as much of a lunatic as he has a reputation of being, which honestly disappoints her. But here's the quote. The fundamental political divide in all political and social systems is between those who want to consolidate power in the hands of one group or another and those who want to distribute and dilute power widely. Rebellion is only revolution when the rebels stand on the opposite side of that divide from those who hold power, regardless of good or ill. It's obvious and reductive, sure, but it's not wrong, and I've never read it stated so clearly. And I really appreciate this because this is the thing that is so and it's tough, guys, because like I know in some ways when I address listeners to my show, y'all, I'm preaching to the choir to a point. So I don't want to like get too bogged down in this, but the thing that I run into a lot is this sort of weird, there's a dovetail in some ways between people who are on the extreme left and the extreme right. And for the record, I consider myself pretty extreme left. And on the extreme left is a real energy of like, you cannot trust the government's intent on things. You cannot trust the systems of policing that we have in place. You cannot trust a system that was built by white supremacists to maintain white supremacy, almost explicitly in a lot of cases, and think that within that system, keeping the system alive itself, it can be fundamentally changed enough to benefit everyone. And so there's a very like, don't trust the system mentality. However, on the extreme right, there's also a very don't trust the system mentality. But it's bizarre because they also advocate obeying the system. So a lot of the same people who will say that there is a weird, like, pedophile conspiracy going on out of a pizzeria that Hillary Clinton owned, those people will come up with these like really bizarre like concepts of what the elite are up to. And yet that same person will argue that like a black person killed by police should have complied. So they hold these two really bizarre where it's like you can't trust them and there's like an Illuminati sort of underbelly, but also do what you're told and obey or you deserve what you get. And I've always found it really weird because it's like, what is it that makes you want to like rebel in quotes, like you want to believe that the system isn't your friend and yet you defend it, like it's just a strange thing. It's the same sort of thing where people who are really firm about, what it comes down to is obeying police, but like also I won't wear a mask. I won't get vaccinated. And I have really struggled to like kind of name what it is with people like that they believe. And I've come to realize that those type of conspiracy theorists they enjoy the concept of the conspiracy itself. It's entertainment for them. It's not actually something to be an activist about. It's something to sort of feel smug and superior, and there's no obligation for you to take action. There's almost a sense of it's so big that you can't do anything. So it's best to just sort of like, you can fling insults and accusations and insinuations, but there's no expectation of really moving your ass to do stuff. And then the people on the left, they will argue like, well, if you think that we shouldn't trust police, shouldn't trust the system, why do you think that more regulation is the way? Because you just said like, well, the government is corrupt and based in white supremacy and can't be trusted. And yet you want the government to be out here telling, companies that they're not allowed to drill here and there. And it always comes down to, well, yeah, because I really believe that like corporations, like capitalism left to its own devices, will always pick the worst thing that makes the most money. It's like the government I think of as it's corrupt in terms of how it handles human rights and how it handles policing and prison and the distribution of power in that sense. But the concept of government to be a stopgap between workers and like CEOs that would be willing to make us work 60 hours a week with no days off if they were allowed, I think that's like what government is for more than anything else. So it's just like that idea of like we would take away power from the people who are billionaires and in charge of establishing what weekdays are, what work days are acceptable, what we can expect for like vacation time and sick pay and maternity care. And the people who are on the other side of things and believe in these weird conspiracy theories, there's like no real sense of wanting to actually stop what's going on in a real way. They talk about it like it's a story they're reading. And it's all like a circle jerk. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, the idea here, those people who simultaneously bring up these weird QAnon theories, but also want the status quo to remain, they are the ones who are enabling small elite groups to hold on to their power. And it's just really funny that they don't seem to see that they're doing that. The first thing, you can like find any story out there where something really unjust has been done, but it's said in the rules somewhere that this is what happens when you do XYZ. And those people will be the first ones in comment sections being like, well, you should have read the rules. That's what it says in the rules. Like, yeah. And that's insane. Why do you not get that? That's the problem, is that it was in the rules. That's what we're talking about. You're just talking about whether what somebody did was like breaking the law. And we are arguing the law is wrong. And it's every time, guys, every time. It is really wild. Misty says, that's for criminals. I'm not a criminal. That's exactly it. Really what it comes down to is always like, I am part of the good, the little group of good people. And we all want to think that. And it's sometimes catches me where I'm like, since we all want to think that, am I doing that? Am I part of the bad? And I'm just falling into that trap. And you do have to keep an eye on that. MX Chard says their anti-government mentality is often rooted in anti-Semitism and the conspiracies that Jewish people control the world to justify hating Jewish people. 100%. Thank you for bringing that, MX Shard, because I always forget. This is something that I am really sensitive to, like certain types of racism and misogyny. And then there are other things that always fly under the radar for me because I've been exposed to them less. And anti-Semitism is something that I feel like I really miss the dog whistles a lot. And I have to have them explained to me. And like, you know, if you go back and listen to the Harry Potter episodes, Rashawn was the one who clocked that the goblins are an anti-Semitic trope. And I had no idea that that was like a thing. So I'm not great at spotting that, but that is such a huge thing. Like the whole lizard people thing, it's a very thinly veiled and anti-Semitic sort of conspiracy theory. But anyway, Godric says, like, well, a lot of people would say power needs to be restricted to the trustworthy. And Talia says people with power to lose would say that. Can't exactly trust their impartiality there. And I'm biased, but my clan has a lot less trouble with corruption and such than other mountain clans with great powers, and our power is distributed much more than most. And this was something that when Rashawn and I did an Unsober episode about creating the unspoiled commune, we were talking about what our system of government would be and how that would work. And we decided that pretty much everything would be down to a popular vote. And that we would have a like sort of board of elders who would be the ones to go through conflicts with people and like represent certain areas of the neighborhoods, but that position of being an elder would rotate yearly. Every year it would be a new group, and you would be required, if you were part of the commune, to serve as one of, so there would be no elections, there would be no serving twice in a row, and so it would be much more difficult to like take advantage of that position and entrench yourself in such a way that you were able to completely, like, you know, we see what's going on in our own government. Like the US, I understand what they were attempting to do when setting up some of the terms and conditions there, but the way things have shaken out, term limits, required retirement after a certain age. We have just watched a man glitch and have what looks like a stroke twice on camera because he is so ancient that he should not be working anymore. And there's another woman, I'm trying to remember her name, and she's basically under a conservatorship and can't advocate for herself, and yet she isn't leaving the Senate because it would, like, the kind of blockage that they could put in place to keep somebody new from being appointed could be a potentially bigger problem. So I wish I could remember her name, but yeah, like, government is so tricky. And I really think with the United States, a big problem is that we are too big. The country is too fucking huge to be managed the way it is set up currently. I really feel that breaking it into sections and having there be, like, you know, 4 states per section, that is a better way. But good luck. Good luck. Feinstein, thank you, Ms. T. Dan says, illegal not meaning wrong is so damn important to understand to not end up being a bootlicker to authority. 100%. It's really upsetting how many people don't really understand the simplicity of that. And I this is something I run into a lot with older people who have been in a world that is like has been established a certain way for so long that they don't ask why. You know, they'll just say, well, that's the way things are. This is the way it's set up. Well, that's how it, and if you poke at that at all, why? There are very obvious ways that we could choose to change things that would be really basic and simple. And yet it's simply accepted at such, with so little question, as if it were a fact of the natural order of planet Earth. And it's, you know, we invented all of this. None of this has to be the the way that it is. We've all agreed that this is the way that it is. And now we've got a significant portion of the population kind of going, hold up, why did we agree to this? This sucks. And we're the problem. But, you know, we have like skyrocketing homeless, debt completely out of control with interest rates in the 33% on credit cards right now. And it just doesn't have to be this way, but everything is just, well, that's how it is. It's not, though. And it's funny because part of that behavior of acting like this is just the way it is ignores that it hasn't been this way actually until very recently. Just how recently we decided that we were going to start making credit scores a thing. That was like in the late 80s. Before that, credit scores were not a thing. It was like did not exist. And yet it's such an established thing that when people find out that's how recent they are, it blows their minds because we all thought this is like, well, this is just how it functions. No, somebody decided that. And recently. And somebody decided that they were going to start charging 600% more for a semester of college. Somebody decided that they were going to create fucked up student loans that you can literally never pay off. Like, this has all been decided. It's not just happening. Oh, I'm so sorry. I know that I get on my soapbox sometimes, you guys. I know. And it's like, I have shit to get through in these chapters. So, more empty houses than unhoused people and a worse wealth divide than right before the French Revolution. There you go. Dan says the USA just has a fucking awful constitution is a big part of it. Oldest extant constitution in the world. It needs to be burned. Don't get me started. Yeah, true. Dana says they were a thing, but giant national credit scores were the 80s. Companies had their own credit scores for decades before that. True. It's just, you know, like it's become such a part of people's identity now. It's just, and they don't tell us everything about how they factor that, which is the other really sus thing. You know, it just kind of makes you go, I wonder if race could factor into it or, you know, anything sort of shady. So this is when Talia brings up learning siege magic. The main argument against learning siege magic is that it ruins the mana reservoir in question for use for anything but siege magic, right? We each have 12 mana reservoirs now, though. We each have more than we know what to do with. And on top of that, it'll give us a way to fight back against some of the great powers out there. And Godric says, I want to know how you could possibly have gotten that idea from the Lucan quote. And I was sort of wondering the same thing. So finally, sunset. They almost miss it, which I kind of enjoy because I've had this where you've been like looking forward to something all day, but you try and make yourself sort of do other stuff to forget it. And then you almost fucking just fly right by it. And they go up onto the roof and he looks for the Triple Mountain and finds it. So that's good because I genuinely was starting to be like, is that even going to fucking be there? And we find out here, it turns out this isn't going to be the thing, but he is like, oh, it'll just take several weeks to get there. And I was like, it's what now? I had no inkling. They had come into this world expecting to spend like almost a month. That's so much. That just really, before we get to the ship, you know, I had a moment of like, what? And he is sort of wondering about the differences in what this world is like versus Galvacrin's Guide to Worlds. As the sun set completely, the city below them drowned in color. There weren't any torches or lanterns needed at all. The numberless glowing runes across the city cast every part of it into a mad rainbow of colors, which sounds like it's too much. That feels like you're about to get sensory overload, you know? The reflected light of the ring's planets began to dim, and the runes seemed to grow even brighter, as though the five of them were sitting above an ocean of pure color. Mackerel darted out of Hugh's arms and dived down into the streets, dancing in the colors. And everybody has kind of a weird reaction to mackerel, which makes sense because there's not really any magic that they have seen that compares to, so he's a really unknown quantity. It took them half the day to cross Hebrest. I can't remember how he says it in the audiobook. Even if they were in a hurry, it would have taken hours. Not only was the city huge, but the streets were a maze as confusing as any labyrinth floor, utterly packed with people. So it says then they still had months before... Did I say months? They still had months before they needed to return to Anastas. Guys, did I miss them saying that? Like, I didn't remember any point in which they determined they were going to remain out, like, away from Anastas for that long. And that really caught me off guard. Months? Like, that is such a long time. And there's a conversation later about exactly how they're going to spend that time, because they have, like, an original plan, but then things don't shake out that way because they're not going to be traveling for as long as they expected due to the ship. But we will get there. And I really love that they have a street artist sketch a drawing of the group. That's adorable. I would like to get something like that done with me and Owen. And we almost did at, like, the Texas State Fair, but there was a pretty good size line. And the fee was something like $55, which is not unreasonable for somebody's talent, but after what we had already spent on entry and food, we were sort of like, probably next year. So this is when they have a conversation about what things are built out of. And it's really Talia that keeps stopping and asking questions about this. She's like, well, the labyrinth is made of limestone, right? So where's all the basalt that the rest of this city is built with? And Godric says, basically, the entire city is built over basalt. Here and there, limestone breaks it up from below. There are a few spots like it on Anastas, too. Flood basalts. Basically, the earth splits open in huge cracks, pours out giant floods of basaltic magma, and covers what's already there. 800 years ago, a flood basalt even wiped out an empire in Gelid, covering up hundreds of leagues of farmland in their heart, wiped out hundreds of thousands of people with volcanic gases. And Talia is like, well, why would they live here if that's a risk? And he's like, that's a risk anywhere. That's how planets work. And they think that maybe there are, like, elementals. I don't know if they have them here, so who knows what's causing it, but yeah. And Hugh says, limestone's not the best for building cities on. It's a great building material, but it's really porous to water. So rain just sinks into the ground and vanishes. Basalt bedrock isn't nearly as porous. And later on, it's Talia that brings up, when they're crossing a bridge, that the bridge is made of wood, but this is a grassland, so where are they getting it from? The wood was bizarrely different from any they'd ever seen before, with an almost non-existent grain. The boards were all weirdly wide and thin. None of them had the remotest guess where it might come from. Shipping down the river was Hugh's best guess, but that would be ridiculously expensive to construct a city the size of Hebrest. And I am wondering if it's grass. You know, like, I'm thinking about bamboo is what I'm thinking of, because bamboo is, I believe, a type of grass, but it is extremely strong. It grows super quickly. I remember reading how fast bamboo grows, and it's something like a foot a day, like an amount that you feel like shouldn't actually be possible. And because it grows so quickly and is so strong, it's not only used in constructing, like, I'm trying to think of the way to word this. It isn't just used as a construction material the way that wood would be. It also is made into fabric, and it is awesome. Anybody out there who does not have bamboo sheets, give them a try, because holy goddamn, best sheets out there. I will never buy anything but bamboo sheets ever again, frankly, because they just are so soft and light, and they are they breathe really well, and I just love them. So yeah, I'm sort of wondering if there's something like that going on here, if they have like, farms for whatever this type of grass is. McShard says, enough bamboo close together and you start consistently hearing the bamboo grow. That's so wild. I wonder if I could grow bamboo in my yard. I have a really big yard and I don't do much with it. And a lot of that is like the kind of patience you need to be a gardener. But if bamboo like has that big a payoff that fast, part of me is sort of like, I don't know, maybe I should just do that. But who knows what kind of climate you would need. And I'm going to hazard a guess that like North Texas is not ideal. So anyway, the whole thing with like Macro getting attention, the crowd is starting to get sort of suspicious. And finally, Talia is like, why don't we show them all Apchek's letter? So she does this, and the mob immediately and quietly dispersed. A great many of them stopped by the weird bird shrine to pray, casting strange looks at Hugh and the others. Talia and Hugh both gave the letter a baffled look. Again, guys, I feel like we have got some sort of weird sacrifice in the offing. I'm the bird shrine. It's just okay. I'm moving on. So I really have to pick it up because you guys, I have so much more to cover. They have a conversation about how the government might work here. It's all pure guesswork. There is, then we go on to the shore of the Sea of Grass, and this sounds so cool. The blades of grass towered 30 feet or so in the air, with bases almost like tree trunks, which is what I'm assuming they're building the, what do you call them? The bridges from. And there are these furred lizards that are 60 feet tall, and it says 4 times that in length. Given their sheer bulk, those giants had to far outweigh any dragon. Galvacrin had mentioned the nomads built their tents on the backs of the behemoths, but Hugh had been expecting small, crudely made personal tents. Instead, huge, finely made, rune-inscribed pavilions rode the back and shoulders of the behemoths with behemoths? Some words, guys. I feel like I've only ever seen and not, like, heard. But yeah, this is a really neat idea. And then there's the grass ships, which he is extremely impressed with because they are enormous. Like, there is just no comparing what they're doing with the grass ships here versus like the sand ships in Anastas. And it says the most astonishing feature was the fact that each of them had floating barges chained behind them. The largest grass ships had as many as 4 or 5 massive cargo-filled barges chained behind them in a line. Each one of the ship chains could probably carry as much as a small fleet back in Anastas. Unlike normal ships, there were access ports in the bottom. Great trapdoors on the flat lower hull had been lowered, and cargo was being loaded and unloaded from both the top and bottom of the ships, which is really cool looking, or cool sounding. Like, I wonder if there's a way. I'm thinking about hunting and the way that you can throw a net off the side of a ship and catch fish, and how something like that would work on a grass ship, because throwing a net and just dragging it is very easy and simple, but it would take something designed in a really specific way for that to work for a ship like this. But eventually, I love this. They find this person, a tired-looking minor official. Her robes were old and patched, and she seemed to be functioning purely by the strength of the huge clay mug of tea she clutched in one hand. She wasn't the first person they'd tried to get to help, but unlike the others, they led by showing her the letter from Apchek. The others had all brushed them off the instant they realized they didn't share a language. So, she reads the letter a few times, gives them a few incredulous looks, and then sighs heavily. And I'm like, what the fuck? Once again. So she takes some gulps of tea, introduces herself as Filiti. And then Filiti gets shit done. She's here to fucking accomplish. This is a competent woman. So Filiti got them through in no more than an hour. It wasn't that the process was that much less intensive than it had been in the labyrinth. It was more that Filiti was astonishingly skilled at navigating through bureaucratic procedures. She yelled, cajoled, and bullied her way through the process at astonishing speed, at one point even physically yanking a pompous official out of his chair and filling out his paperwork herself, all while yelling at the bewildered official. Hugh was pretty sure the official was apologizing to Filiti by the end of her rant, based on the expression and tone of his voice. I love this so much. You guys, the lack of competence in the world, I really wonder about it sometimes. Like how we have managed to achieve the things that we have regarding architecture and technology and, a lot of like the things that we have needed a group working together to make it happen. When I see the average person's mindset, the way they think, I really want to know, how did we even do any of this? And this sort of thing, and her just being like, get the fuck out of the chair, let me fill it out. No, not, you don't sign there, no, move. I really felt this in my heart. I love that through all of this too, Mackerel is trying to like prank Sabe, and she just kind of goes, you're really trying way too hard, Mackerel. This is embarrassing for you. Just accept that you're maturing. And eventually she gets them into the back of a hover barge. The driver took them through the port so fast that Talia got nauseous. Filiti seemed utterly unconcerned the whole time and somehow didn't spill a drop of tea from her mug. And I really like that detail. Once again, this is a woman who is used to a fucking hurricane of chaos around her all the time and is just like, Tuesday. Filiti ushered them into a bustling office filled with lavish furniture, statues, and paintings where she promptly got into an argument with one of the clerks. Finally, after showing the clerk all the documents Apchek had given them, the documents she'd filled out for them, and Apchek's letter, the clerk begrudgingly waved them over and through pantomime indicated they needed to pay him. And he wants a lot of money, to which Talia is like, maybe we could just buy a ship. But the clerk hands them each a foil-embossed, rune-inscribed certificate, and Filiti escorts them out of the office again. A few minutes later, the group found themselves approaching the dock of the largest ship chain they'd seen yet. Each of the barges was bigger than a building. And she stuck out her open palm with a smug grin. I think this is the part where we bribe her, Sabe said. I'd say it's a bribe well earned, Godric responded. Hugh and Talia just nodded in agreement. I really liked that. Some people, they expect a bribe to just do their fucking job. And then there are people like this where they are, above and beyond, requires above and beyond compensation. And that's just facts. So then 34, sailing the green depths. They only had to show off the foil-embossed certificates to be let on the ship chain, but before she left them, Filiti made them show the black and gold uniformed ship chain crew Apchek's letter, which immediately made them start treating Hugh and his friends more respectfully as they escorted them on board. Well, most of them. One of the ship chain's crew members retreated at high speed after giving them terrified looks. This is killing me, guys. This is killing me. Like, it's sort of reminding me of in A Song of Ice and Fire when Arya is heading to Braavos and she has the coin and does the Vala Morgulis, and the men on the ship they give her a cabin, which is like unheard of, and they all of the men on the ship who are like part of the crew and stuff give her little gifts and ask her to remember them and give them their names. There's like, we understand once we reach Braavos and the House of Black and White, exactly what the deal is with the faceless and the god that they worship, the stranger in Westeros, but the kind of superstition that's going on because of what she carries is very palpable. And I'm sort of like, is that what's happening here? And yet, if it's a superstition, it was like sanctioned by, I don't know if I want to call the people who work at the Labyrinth a government agency, but I feel like I can. So it feels like more than a superstition. It feels like official, I don't know what's going on here. Dan says, I knew this would kill you. It really does. So they go into their room and it's just so lavish. And there is a moment that's underlined by a lot of people. And I was listening to the audiobook, but I knew as soon as I heard this line, I was like, I bet that's been underlined. Hugh couldn't help but feel out of place here. Less due to the fact he was from another world, and more due to the fact that part of him was still convinced he was just a peasant from the backwoods of Emblem, and everyone around him could tell he didn't belong. Even having moved in circles with fabulously wealthy great powers and archmages for years now, and having enough gold hidden away in his storage tattoo to buy a small village back in Emblem, Hugh still couldn't shake that feeling. The anxieties of poverty never really went away, even when the actual poverty did so. And that is the fucking truth. It really, there is a thing too about the kinds of people who have grown up around wealth. They have a different approach to handling the trappings of that wealth that really gives away how used to it they are. And this is the sort of thing I really noticed when I was like planning my wedding, because, as somebody who is very lower middle class, upper lower class, I'm somewhere in there, I have not had the opportunity to do a lot of hiring of independent contractors. And you do that a lot for a wedding. You're getting caterers, you're hiring a venue, you're finding people to do your makeup and bake your cake and all of that stuff. And when I started to like get in touch with people, there would be questionnaires that you would have to fill out, or like FAQs, and they would sort of say like, I don't do X, Y, and Z if you're looking for this. And the X, Y, and Z that they didn't do was the sort of like extreme shit. It would never even occur to me. They would, but apparently people would go into this like expecting that kind of service. And I was just like, who even thinks that's like reasonable? And a lot of the services that I bought the like bottom tier. And when I looked at what was available in the top tier, it was like the kind of literally everything short of wiping your ass for you. And I was just like, who chooses that? Like, I would feel so uncomfortable at a person being expected to do every little thing for me to that degree. And I really appreciate it. If you ever watch Succession, that is about a family that just grew up with incredible wealth, like outside of the scope of most people in the world. And the way that they don't seem to even see the service people working for them. They have housekeepers, they have drivers, and they get in and out of cars. A person has opened the door for them. Do they thank the person for opening the door? No, they don't even make eye contact. It's like they're not there, because that person is a prop. That person is a part of the car, not a human being that goes home at the end of the day to their family. And I used to be that person. I worked as a bellhop and front desk at a luxury resort. I know what doing that kind of job is like. And so there's no way for me to disconnect with who they are. I know that's a human being, but people who are like moving through those upper echelons of society, that is not a human being. They don't probably know their name, like it's this, eventually there's a part in that story where there's a tragedy and a person dies. But because they are somebody who I think was like part of staff, The incident is written down as no real person involved. That's literally like written text, and that is based on a real event. So yeah, the feeling of being like, I'm out of my element here, that's not foolish. That's not coming from nowhere. You are in a different circle than you had been. And probably the people who have belonged in that circle for a long time can tell. There are probably a lot of giveaways, you know? It's just a fascinating, like, just down to rich people don't wear coats because they're not outside long enough. They go from their building to a car that is heated and ready and waiting for them, and they are dropped off directly in front of the building that they go to. That's part of the like culture, is that I don't have to worry about it unless I am wearing coat for fashion and I want people to see it, but I'm not walking anywhere. So like even down to a point where a character is dating a woman who's just an ordinary, and one of the rich people at the party is like joking, is she carrying flats in her bag so that she can walk to the subway? And they're like mocking that like it's shameful, because even though that is a completely reasonable thing to be and do, to them, it's so out of the question. That's just not their world. So anyway, I am just so, like, I just understand this so much. And I have often sympathized with people in stories who are like new money, because if you didn't grow up with it, how do you not act weird around it? It's a totally alien experience. And especially, it's almost like, to me, the concept of suddenly coming into a lot of money when you grew up without it is similar to having been fat for a long time and suddenly losing weight. And you begin to realize, like, I am treated completely differently now. And it's reinforcing all of the terrible things you always thought about what people thought of you based on the way that you looked or how much money you had. And you begin to be like, oh, all of that is true. That's the world. Well, cool, you know? But I appreciate at least Talia just being like, this is it. Yes. She goes and sits down on a couch and like sinks into it and is like, oh. And I will say, as much as I can be uncomfortable, oh, I love luxury. It's a real problem with me of like, that's part of why I do too much with trips and, you know, even just the way I live at home. I just like things to feel extra nice. So I would probably also be just like wrapping up in a soft blanket and burritoing on the sofa, just going, oh, this is awesome. So eventually they take off, and the ship, it's just a really neat, like, let's see. The whole ship chain turned in a great half loop as the sledge ship pulling it swung back toward the grass sea. As it did so, Hugh caught sight of the sledge ship again. Its immense gyroscope had increased its rate of spin to the point where its runes had blurred together, though Hugh could still make out the individual loops revolving around one another. Its spin was gradually accelerating even as Hugh watched it. It wouldn't be long before the whole thing turned into a blurry sphere of light. A random pang stabbed through him at the realization that the gyroscope was almost exactly the same size as Candoron's crystal sphere. By the time Hugh had forced that thought back down again, the ship chain was pulling into the sea of grass. So they head out there. I kept thinking with this about like the grass Dothraki Sea in Song of Ice and Fire, but this is like a much more dramatic version of that. And they find a crew member and ask how long it'll take to reach the mountain. And it says 3 days. Talia was a little sad about how little time they'd have on board the ship chain. Unlike sand ships, the ship chain wasn't making her seasick in the least. And I was very relieved about that for her. They were probably 10 or 15 feet below the grass line, and the sunlight was dim and green, cut off by the towering blades of grass above them. The blades near them blurred past, but they could make out the grassy depths more clearly farther away. The grass sea was astonishingly full of life. This is so cool, you guys. Just like being below and being able to see all of these different like animals. There's lizards, there's birds, there's a turtle that looks like almost furry. The grass wasn't the only plant life, but what other plants there were seemed dependent on the towering blades. Vines wrapped themselves around the lower reaches, often stretching from one to another. Small ferns wrapped their roots around the outsides, thriving in the shade. Here and there, Hugh could see where a few large stalks had fallen, but the grasslands seemed determined not to let any meadows last very long. They were well along the way to being refilled by young grass. And then they pass a serpent. And Hugh couldn't help but feel as though the creature was menacing him specifically. And I was like, why? What is that about? I found that weird. They were careful not to drain their mana reservoirs all the way while training, just most of the way. As the afternoon progressed, they also did plenty of other self-guided research and training. After running over the section of Galvacrin's Guide to Worlds, he looked up at his friends, just in time to dodge a bone shard Godric had tossed his way. We need to talk about our plan. The trip was supposed to take weeks, not a few days. Instead of waiting here on Cometrius until we're ready to return to our world, I think we should head through the labyrinth right away and do our training there. In Limnus? The horrible death world that's almost as deadly as Apoptis? With the poisonous atmosphere, horrible monsters, and constant earthquakes? That's the one. I have to admit, I'm a little confused. Why exactly would we want to go to Limnus? Because we'll have time to learn some of its magic now. We won't even have to put in any effort to learn it. Just a matter of spending at least a month there, we'll get a bit of it automatically. Here, we would have to live for a couple years before we could start developing it. According to Galvacrin, the speed you can develop Limnan magic at is pretty unusual. So that chapter ends with him trying to persuade them. And then the next chapter ends with Talia spotting pirates heading toward them, and she gets so excited. I love that Godric is like, "Are you sure they're pirates? Like, what if they're good guys?" And she's like, "Dude, they're attacking a ship full of civilians. Do you really think that there's a likelihood that they're maybe on the right side of things?" And he's like, "Well, okay, fine." And so they go up to the roof, and I'm like out of time here, so I'm going to have to kind of summarize. But the main thing that you need to know is that Godric's armor is not quite up for it. I'm not saying it's useless, because it does keep him from getting hurt, but they're getting arrows deep into the stone of that armor, and he isn't doing the damn, like, he had guessed when they first saw the armor of the people who were meeting them in the labyrinth. He saw, this looks pretty strong, and I'm really glad that I don't have to fight these people. And it's turning out that his suppositions were right. And there's 12 ships, by the way. I was thinking, like, we're going to have pirates with a ship hitting this one. But it makes more sense that, like, how big these ship chains are, that you would need a fleet to attack them. It's not just going to be one person. And let's see. Talia bombarded the ship's deck with dreamfire. To his right, Hugh blasted the hull of the ship with quartz wardstone after quartz wardstone. And when we go to Hugh's POV a little bit later, he is a little kind of disappointed at how little the wardstones are really doing. The damage is not substantial. And it's interesting because of how overpowered they have seemed to be getting, that in this world, it's not actually hitting as hard as I was sort of wondering if them, like, doing most of their training in secret was leading up to a big reveal of how powerful they were that was going to cow the Cometrians. But no, it's actually kind of like, well, thanks for your help, but, I don't know. There's a feeling here of just like, they're not accomplishing nothing, but it's certainly not the kind of game changer necessarily that they thought. So let's see. Hugh had already used up a tenth of his quartz wardstones, and though he'd put a series of small cracks in the ship's hull, it was barely more than cosmetic damage. And these, like, suits of armor, reminder, they are huge, you know? We're talking like 10 feet tall, which I definitely keep forgetting. They're like little Iron Mans. And Hugh uses Starfire and tells his friends to protect their eyes. The paper suit of armor should have been completely incinerated, but when the light faded, the armor was still mostly intact. It had been thrown back a dozen feet, patches of fire were scattered across it, and the deck between its starting and current position had been littered with strips of rune paper, but it was still intact and still moving. The fires on the suit snuffed out, and as they did so, a small shower of strips of paper flared brighter, then went dark and fell off the armor entirely. The vast majority of the suit was untouched, and I was like, oh, this sucks. So we then go to Sabe. She cast an 8th and final galvanic anchor spell before launching herself back toward the ship chain. When she landed back on its flat roof, she whirled, facing the attacking ship, then cast a basic lightning spell. Basic, however, didn't mean weak. She drained almost 2/3 of her lightning mana reservoir, sending a lightning bolt into the ship's sails, one powerful enough that it almost overwhelmed her anti-glare cantrip. She let it burn for 10 whole heartbeats. The lightning bolt should have incinerated the ship's masts and sails. Instead, when the lightning bolt cleared, they were still there. Again, it's just like so much of this. It's not that it's not hitting. It's not that it's doing nothing, but it's not doing nearly as much as they are used to it doing. And she is starting to like wonder what's going on with these attackers because they're all basically in uniform. And she's like, they're marching toward that spinny thing. And that is the end of her, well, that chapter in her POV there is like noticing what it is they seem to actually be going after and being like, okay, time to deal with this now. I don't know what's up. So, you guys, I have really got to go. I'm so over. But yeah, this was a really interesting section and I'm super curious. I'm dying to know what the fucking deal is with this place. And I'm worried about our friends. All right, I've got to wrap up. Thank you again so much for listening, and to Dan for commissioning this. Until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.